The crimson sun of Tertius Prime cast long shadows across the detention platform as Marcus Vale knelt in the crystalline dust, his hands bound behind his back with neural restraints that sent jolts of agony through his nervous system with every movement. The alien metal felt cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the burning humiliation that coursed through his veins like liquid fire. Above him, towering on the obsidian dais that reflected the dying light like a pool of black water, stood Enforcer Zephyra Kane. Her species, the Veiltharn, had conquered 17 systems in the past decade, their pale blue skin and silver eyes marking them as the galaxy's newest apex predators. Unlike humans, they felt no physical pain, a biological advantage that made them fearless in combat and ruthless in governance. Their bodies were living weapons, enhanced by millennia of evolution that had stripped away what they considered weakness. Marcus had once admired their efficiency from afar, studying their biochemistry in the sterile laboratories of the Terran Research Institute. Now, as their prisoner, he understood the true cost of their supposed perfection. The crowd of human colonists pressed against the energy barriers surrounding the platform, their faces a mixture of fear and barely contained rage. Children clung to their parents' legs, too young to understand why their heroes were being made to grovel in the dust. Citizens of Tertius Prime, Zephyra's voice carried across the square through the translation matrix embedded in her throat, each word precisely enunciated and devoid of emotion. You witness today the fate of those who defy the natural order. Marcus Vale, former head of bioengineering at the Terran Institute, stands accused of refusing to develop neural enhancement protocols for Veiltharn use. The charges were technically accurate, though they stripped away all context. Marcus had indeed refused to weaponize his research into human neurochemistry, declining to create compounds that would make his own species more compliant to alien rule when he'd attempted to expose the true purpose of the medical research project. Veiltharn intelligence had acted swiftly. His laboratory was destroyed, his research confiscated, and he was branded a terrorist. The human exhibits the fundamental flaw of his species, Zephyra continued, her silver eyes scanning the crowd with clinical detachment, emotional attachment to abstract concepts like dignity and freedom. These illusions prevent efficient governance and must be corrected. Marcus raised his head, meeting her gaze despite the neural restraints sending fresh waves of pain through his skull. In his 43 years, he had published over 100 papers on xenobiology, earned 3 advanced degrees, and helped develop treatments that had saved countless lives. Now he was reduced to a cautionary tale, a symbol of human stubbornness in the face of superior alien logic. Kneel properly, Zephyra commanded, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Place your forehead against the platform and acknowledge your error. The neural restraints tightened automatically, forcing Marcus's head down toward the crystalline surface. The material was harvested from the same mines where human prisoners worked 16-hour shifts, their fingers bleeding, as they extracted the precious minerals that powered Veiltharn technology. Every facet caught the light differently, creating a kaleidoscope of reflected suffering. But Marcus resisted, drawing upon reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. He fought against the restraint's compulsion, raising his head inch by agonizing inch. Blood ran from his nose where the neural feedback was strongest, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. I am Marcus Vale, he said, his words carrying across the silent square. I am a scientist, a father, and a citizen of the Terran Republic. I have committed no crime except refusing to betray my own species. A murmur ran through the crowd, part fear, part admiration. Zephyra's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered behind her silver eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or merely annoyance at the delay in proceedings. Your defiance serves no purpose, she replied, stepping down from the dais with fluid grace. Each movement was precisely calculated, her enhanced physiology allowing her to move with a speed and efficiency that made human reflexes seem sluggish. By comparison, submit now and your suffering will be minimal. Marcus had studied Veiltharn psychology extensively during his research. They viewed physical pain as an inefficient biological response, an evolutionary dead end that their species had successfully overcome. They could be wounded, certainly, but their nervous systems simply didn't process damage in the same way as other species. It made them perfect soldiers and administrators, capable of making decisions based purely on logic rather than emotional responses to discomfort. "You want to know what makes humans different?" Marcus asked, his voice growing stronger despite the increasing neural feedback. "It's not our stubbornness or our emotionalism. It's our capacity to find meaning in suffering." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zephyra paused, her head tilting slightly in a gesture that might have indicated confusion in a human. For a species that had never experienced pain, the concept of finding purpose in discomfort was genuinely alien. "Explain," she commanded, though whether from scientific curiosity or simple desire to understand her enemy was unclear. Marcus struggled to his feet, the neural restraints fighting him every step of the way. When he finally stood upright, blood streaming down his face, there was something magnificent about his defiance. He was broken but not defeated, humiliated but not humbled. "Pain teaches us empathy," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. "When we suffer, we understand the suffering of others. When we hurt, we learn to heal. Your species sees pain as weakness, but for us it's the foundation of compassion." He took a step forward, and the crowd held its collective breath. The neural restraints were designed to prevent aggressive movement, but Marcus wasn't attacking, he was demonstrating something far more dangerous to the Veiltharn worldview. "You rule through fear because you can't understand why anyone would choose to suffer for something greater than themselves," he continued, each word costing him visible effort. "But humans have been doing exactly that for millennia. We suffer for our children, for our principles, for our hope of a better future." Zephyra's hand moved to the neural disruptor at her side, a weapon capable of shutting down a human nervous system instantly. But she hesitated, her scientific training warring with her enforcement protocols. Marcus Vale was supposed to be broken by now, reduced to a groveling example of human weakness. Instead, he stood before her like a living contradiction to everything she'd been taught about inferior species. "Your suffering serves no logical purpose," she said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "That's where you're wrong," Marcus replied, his eyes finding members of the crowd, friends, colleagues, fellow colonists who had watched him grow from a young researcher into a respected leader. "My suffering serves the most important purpose of all. It shows them that some things are worth the pain." The neural restraints reached maximum intensity, designed to force unconsciousness rather than allow further defiance. But in the moment before Marcus collapsed, he did something that would haunt Zephyra for cycles to come. Despite the agony coursing through his body, despite the humiliation and the certainty of worse to come, he smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile or a mocking one. It was the smile of a man who had found something worth suffering for, something that transcended his own comfort and safety. It was a uniquely human expression, incomprehensible to a species that had never learned to find meaning in adversity. As Marcus fell unconscious to the crystalline platform, Zephyra stared down at his motionless form with something approaching confusion. According to every psychological profile in the Veiltharn database, he should have been a broken man by now. Instead, his defiance had somehow transformed his humiliation into something that looked almost like victory for the first time in her 37 cycles of existence. Enforcer Zephyra Kane found herself questioning whether her species truly understood the nature of strength, and in that moment of doubt, something shifted not just in her understanding of humans, but in the carefully constructed certainties that had governed her entire worldview. 3 cycles had passed since Marcus Vale's public defiance, yet Zephyra Kane found herself returning to the detention platform each evening. As Tertius Prime's crimson sun began its descent toward the horizon, the crystalline surface where he had fallen still bore faint traces of his blood, microscopic stains that the automated cleaning systems had somehow missed, or perhaps chosen to ignore. She stood alone on the obsidian dais, her pale blue skin luminescent in the dying light, trying to understand the strange restlessness that had taken hold of her thoughts. The Veiltharn Medical Corps had examined her thoroughly. After filing her mandatory post-incident report, their neural scanners detecting no abnormalities in her enhanced physiology. Her pain receptors remained dormant, her emotional inhibitors functioned perfectly, and her cognitive processes showed no deviation from optimal parameters. Yet something fundamental had changed. The human's words echoed in her mind with disturbing persistence. Pain teaches us empathy. When we suffer, we understand the suffering of others. The concept should have been meaningless to her. Suffering was inefficiency, a biological flaw that evolution had rightfully discarded. But Marcus Vale's expression in that final moment, that inexplicable smile on the face of agony, haunted her with its implications. Enforcer Kane. The voice belonged to Sub-Commander Thylex Vor, her immediate subordinate and a perfect example of Valetharn efficiency. His silver eyes held no curiosity, no doubt, only the steady assurance of absolute certainty. The prisoner has been transferred to Mining Complex 7 as ordered. His neural conditioning is proceeding within acceptable parameters. Zephyra nodded, though she found herself wondering what acceptable parameters meant for a species that derived meaning from suffering. Has he shown signs of compliance? Negative. He continues to resist standard conditioning protocols, though his physical deterioration follows predicted models. Thylex paused, accessing data through his neural implant. Productivity in his assigned sector has decreased by 12% since his arrival. Other prisoners appear to be influenced by his continued defiance. The logical response would be to intensify the conditioning, perhaps recommend termination if the productivity loss continued. But Zephyra found herself hesitating, remembering the way Marcus had looked at the crowd, not with the desperate hunger of a man seeking rescue, but with something that resembled love. Maintain current protocols, she decided, continue monitoring. As Thylex departed with characteristic efficiency, Zephyra remained on the platform, watching the last light fade from the alien sky. Tertius Prime had been a thriving human colony before the Valetharn arrival, its cities designed with an aesthetic sensibility that prioritized beauty over function, a luxury her species had never understood. Now those same cities bore the geometric modifications of optimal governance, their organic curves replaced by angular efficiency. The transformation was complete, yet Zephyra found herself noticing details she had previously overlooked. The way human children still drew pictures on walls, DESPITE regulations prohibiting unauthorized markings, the manner in which elderly humans would pause to comfort those who struggled with their assigned labor quotas, small acts of defiance that served no logical purpose, yet somehow persisted like weeds growing through duracrete. Her contemplation was interrupted by an urgent transmission through her neural link. All enforcement units report to Medical Bay 7 immediately. Priority. 1 incident in progress. The medical bay was in chaos when she arrived, as close to chaos as a Valetharn facility could achieve. Sub-Commander Thylex lay on a bioassessment table, his usual composure replaced by something Zephyra had never seen in her species: distress. Medical technicians moved around him with increased urgency, their scanners revealing readings that defied explanation. Report, Zephyra commanded, her voice cutting through the controlled confusion. Chief Medical Officer Kythan turned from the displays, his silver eyes reflecting genuine bewilderment. Sub-Commander Thylex was conducting routine interrogation of human prisoners when he suffered what can only be described as a systemic neural anomaly. His pain receptors have somehow become active. The words hit Zephyra like a physical blow. Pain receptors were vestigial organs in Valetharn physiology, evolutionary remnants that had been genetically suppressed for over 10,000 cycles. Their activation was theoretically impossible. The neural pathways simply didn't exist in their current form. How, she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. We're still investigating, but preliminary analysis suggests exposure to an unknown biochemical agent, something that reactivated dormant neural pathways. Kythan's confusion was evident in every word. The effect appears to be permanent. We cannot reverse the activation without causing severe brain damage. Zephyra approached the biotable where Thylex writhed in obvious distress. His enhanced physiology was designed to repair damage efficiently, but now that same efficiency was amplifying every minor injury into a cascade of sensation. A small cut on his hand barely visible to the naked eye was causing tremors throughout his entire body. "How does it feel?" she asked, the question surprising her with its spontaneity. Thylex's silver eyes found hers, and for the first time in their cycles of service together, she saw genuine emotion in his gaze. Fear, confusion, and something else of vulnerability. That made him seem almost human. "It is overwhelming," he whispered, his voice strained. "Every sensation is amplified. The pressure of the biotable against my back, the temperature variance in the air, the minor abrasions from my restraints, they all demand attention simultaneously. How do inferior species function with such constant distraction?" The question was rhetorical, but Zephyr found herself considering it seriously. Humans lived with this sensory bombardment every moment of their existence, yet somehow managed to create art, form relationships, and find meaning in their brief lives. The inefficiency was staggering, yet the results suggested something her species had missed in their pursuit of perfection. "Sir," one of the medical technicians approached with obvious reluctance, "we've identified the source of contamination. The human prisoner Vale has been secreting a modified biochemical compound through his skin, apparently synthesized from materials available in the mining complex. Exposure occurs through direct contact." Zephyr's mind raced through the implications. Marcus had been a bioengineer, specializing in human neurochemistry. If he had somehow found a way to weaponize human biology, to create a compound that could awaken dormant Valetharn neural pathways. "Has anyone else been exposed?" she asked, unknown. "The compound appears to require specific conditions for activation, prolonged contact, during states of heightened neural activity. Interrogation scenarios would provide optimal exposure parameters." The medical bay suddenly felt too small, too confined. Zephyr excused herself and made her way to the observation deck that overlooked Mining Complex 7. In the distance, she could see the massive excavation sites where human prisoners extracted the materials that powered their technological superiority. Somewhere in those depths, Marcus Vale was conducting the most dangerous experiment in galactic history, not in a laboratory, but within his own transformed physiology. She activated her neural link and accessed the prisoner monitoring system. Marcus's bio readings appeared on her visual display, elevated stress indicators, signs of physical deterioration, but also something unexpected, periods of decreased activity that suggested deep concentration. He was working on something, even in the depths of the mining complex. The realization hit her with startling clarity. Marcus hadn't simply refused to cooperate with Valetharn research. He had continued his own research, using himself as the test subject. The compound affecting Thylex wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was something far more dangerous, a gift, the ability to feel pain, to experience suffering, to understand the vulnerability that shaped every other species. In the galaxy dot, as she watched the distant mining operations, Zephyr became aware of a strange sensation in her own body, a faint tingling in her fingertips, a subtle awareness of temperature and pressure that hadn't been there before. She looked down at her hands, remembering the moment when she had touched Marcus's restraints to adjust their intensity. The tingling spread up her arms, and for the first time in her 37 cycles of existence, Zephyr Kane felt something that no Valetharn was supposed to experience. The fabric of her uniform against her skin, the subtle vibration of the station's life support systems, the gentle pressure of her own heartbeat sensations that had always existed, but never registered in her consciousness. She was changing, molecule by molecule, neural pathway by neural pathway. The perfect efficiency of her species was being replaced by something messier, more complex, infinitely more vulnerable, and the most terrifying part was that she didn't want it to stop. In the depths of Mining Complex 7, Marcus Vale continued his work, unaware that his greatest experiment was beginning to spread through the ranks of his captors. The revolution would not be fought with weapons or armies, but with the simple, radical gift of teaching an invulnerable species how to feel. The mining tunnels of Complex 7 stretched into darkness like the arteries of some immense, dying beast. Tobias Gray had spent the last 8 years learning every turn, every unstable support beam, every pocket of toxic gas that could kill. A man in seconds. At 51, He was ancient by prisoner standards. Most didn't survive their third year in the deep shafts. His scarred hands and weathered face told the story of countless cave-ins, equipment failures, and the daily brutality that defined life in the deepest levels of Tertius Prime's industrial hell. He had been a cargo pilot before the Vaeltharn conquest, running supplies between the outer colonies. Nothing glamorous, just honest work that kept the trade routes flowing. When the aliens arrived with their impossible technology and emotionless efficiency, Tobias had joined the underground resistance not out of any grand ideological conviction, but because someone had to try. The resistance lasted exactly 47 days before Vaeltharn intelligence systematically dismantled every cell, every safe house, every hope of organized opposition. Now he ruled a different kind of resistance in the depths of the mines, not a rebellion against alien occupation, but a stubborn refusal to let the darkness claim what remained of human dignity. The Gray Network, as other prisoners called it, was less organization than organism, a web of mutual aid, information, sharing, and quiet defiance that helped keep men and women alive in conditions designed to break them. The network operated on simple principles: share information about safe passages, warn others about unstable areas, pool medical supplies, and never let a man die alone if you could help it. It wasn't heroic work, just the basic recognition that survival required community, even in a place designed to strip away everything that made life worth living. Tobias was checking the structural integrity of support beam J7 when the tremors began, not the usual seismic instability from the excavation blasting, but something else, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to originate from the upper levels. Emergency lighting flickered as whatever was happening above sent shockwaves through the complex's foundation. Gray, the voice belonged to Petra Voss, a geological engineer who had become his most trusted lieutenant in the 8 months since her arrival. She emerged from a side tunnel, her face grim with concern. Something's happening topside. The guards have pulled back from all the checkpoint positions. Tobias frowned, setting down his improvised inspection tools. In 8 years, the Vaeltharn had never deviated from their established patrol patterns. Their efficiency was absolute, their protocols unvarying. For them to abandon standard procedures suggested something catastrophic. Any word from the upper-level networks, he asked, referring to the informal communication system that connected different prisoner groups. Throughout the complex, that's just it. Communications are down everywhere. Not jammed, not monitored, just silent. Petra's voice carried an edge of fear that had nothing to do with their usual dangers. It's like everyone up there just stopped talking. They made their way through the tunnel system toward maintenance shaft C, one of the few routes that provided visual access to the upper levels without triggering automated security systems. The shaft had been abandoned years ago when the excavation moved deeper, but it still contained a functional elevator platform that could carry them high enough to observe the main complex. As they ascended, Tobias found himself thinking about Marcus Vale, the former bioengineer who had arrived 3 cycles ago and immediately upset the careful balance of the mining operations. Unlike most prisoners, who either broke quickly or adapted to the system, Vale had chosen a third option. He had begun changing the system itself. It started small modifications to the air filtration units that made the toxic atmosphere slightly more breathable, adjustments to the excavation equipment that reduced the frequency of accidents, subtle alterations to the food distribution system that ensured pregnant women and elderly prisoners received adequate nutrition. The changes were invisible to Vaeltharn oversight, implemented through Vale's deep understanding of the complex's biochemical and mechanical systems. But more disturbing was Vale's effect on the prisoners themselves. He had somehow retained the kind of hope that should have been impossible in their circumstances, not the desperate, grasping hope that led to futile escape attempts, but something deeper, a quiet certainty that their suffering had meaning, that their endurance mattered in ways that transcended their immediate circumstances. The elevator platform shuddered to a halt at the observation level, and Tobias peered through the reinforced viewing port that offered a glimpse of the upper complex. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about Vaeltharn behavior. Guards were moving erratically through the corridors, their usual precise formation replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. Several were supporting colleagues who appeared to be injured or ill, their perfect posture replaced by the hunched vulnerability of beings in distress. Emergency lighting bathed everything in an ominous red glow, and the normally silent facility echoed with sounds he had never heard before, alien voices raised in what might have been pain or fear. "What the hell is happening up there?" Petra whispered, pressing against the viewing port beside him. Before Tobias could respond, the elevator platform lurched as someone accessed it from above. Emergency protocols should have prevented unauthorized use, but the descending car suggested that normal security measures had been compromised. Tobias pulled Petra back into the shadows, his hand moving to the improvised knife he carried, a mining tool sharpened to a lethal edge. The elevator doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the last person Tobias expected to see in the depths of Mining Complex 7. Enforcer Zephyra Kane. But something was wrong with the alien commander. Her usual fluid grace was replaced by jerky, uncertain movements, and her pale blue skin showed a sheen of perspiration that Tobias had never seen on a Veiltharn. Most disturbing of all were her eyes, the cold silver orbs that had watched countless humans suffer without emotion now reflected something that looked almost like panic. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "Where is Marcus Vale?" Tobias stepped out of the shadows, his knife visible but not threatening. In 8 years of imprisonment, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when violence was imminent. Whatever was happening to the enforcer, she wasn't in a state to fight effectively. "Depends on what you want with him," Tobias replied carefully. "Doc's got enough troubles without adding an enforcer's attention to them." Zephyra's head snapped toward him, and Tobias saw something impossible in her alien features. Desperation. "You don't understand. Something is happening to my people. We need his help." The statement was so absurd that Tobias almost laughed. The Veiltharn had spent decades perfecting techniques for breaking human resistance, developing ever more efficient methods of extracting compliance from their subject populations. The idea that they might need human assistance was like suggesting that the laws of physics had been repealed. "Your people," Tobias said slowly, "have been trying to break us for years. Why should we help you with anything?" "Because," Zephyra replied, her voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't identify. "We're beginning to understand what you've been going through." She raised her hands, and Tobias could see tremors running through her fingers when she spoke. Again, her words carried a vulnerability that seemed to physically pain her to express. "We can feel now. Pain, fear, all the sensations we thought made other species weak. And we don't know how to make it stop." The revelation hit Tobias like a physical blow. If the Veiltharn were somehow losing their immunity to physical and emotional suffering, it would explain the chaos in the upper levels. A species that had never learned to cope with pain would be completely helpless when exposed to it. "For the first time, Vale did this?" he asked. "We believe so. Some kind of biochemical agent that reactivates dormant neural pathways. It's spreading through our ranks, and we have no idea how to control it or reverse it." Tobias found himself in the most unexpected position of his life, holding leverage over his captors. The Veiltharn's greatest strength had always been their immunity to the suffering they inflicted. If that immunity was failing, the entire power structure of their occupation would collapse. But as he looked at Zephyra's trembling hands, at the genuine fear in her silver eyes, he realized that revenge wasn't what he wanted. What he wanted was something far more complex, understanding. "I'll take you to him," Tobias decided. "But you need to understand something first. Down here, in the deep tunnels, we operate by different rules. You're not an enforcer anymore, you're just another person trying to survive. Can you handle that?" Zephyra nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely certain what she was agreeing to. As they began the descent into the deepest levels of the complex, Tobias found himself walking beside the being who had overseen countless acts of brutality against his people. But for the first time since his capture, he sensed the possibility of something beyond mere survival, the chance for their captors to truly understand what they had put their prisoners through. The alliance between predator and prey was about to begin, born not from mutual respect, but from mutual vulnerability, and in the depth. The abandoned communications array on Tertius Prime's northern continent had been dark for 3 years, its transmitters silenced when the Veiltharn decided that human colonists no longer required contact with the outside galaxy. Naya Cross had spent those 3 years learning every circuit, every relay, every quantum entanglement node that could potentially carry a signal. Beyond the planet's atmospheric interference grid. At 28, she possessed the kind of technical intuition that made her dangerous to occupying forces, the ability to coax functionality from broken systems, to find signal pathways where none should exist, to jury-rig solutions that defied conventional engineering wisdom. Before the invasion, she had been a communications specialist aboard the merchant vessel Wandering Star, keeping trade routes connected across 17 systems. Now she was officially classified as a non-essential civilian, assigned to agricultural labor in the colony's food production zones. Unofficially, she was the most important person the human resistance had never managed to recruit. Naya preferred to work alone. Groups attracted attention, created security vulnerabilities, and inevitably fell victim to Veiltharn surveillance techniques that seemed to anticipate human psychology with disturbing accuracy. Better to remain invisible, to appear compliant while quietly building something that could change everything. The communications array sprawled across 50 square kilometers of windswept plateau, its dish arrays and transmission towers creating a metallic forest against the alien sky. Most of the equipment had been systematically disabled, but the Veiltharn had been thorough rather than destructive. They understood that infrastructure might be useful in the future. Components were disconnected, not destroyed. Control systems were locked down, not removed. For someone with Naya's expertise, the distinction was crucial. She had been working in the facility's depths for 6 months, slowly bringing auxiliary systems online while maintaining the appearance of complete shutdown. Her approach was methodical. First, she restored power to non-essential circuits that wouldn't register on orbital monitoring systems. Then she began connecting backup relay networks that could carry data without triggering the primary security protocols. The work required patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of both human and Veiltharn technology. Each connection had to be perfect, each modification invisible to automated scans. One mistake would bring enforcement units down on the facility, ending not just her project, but quite possibly her life. Tonight was different. For the first time in 3 years, she was receiving signals from outside the planetary system. The transmissions were fragmentary, heavily encoded, and filtered through so many relay points that their origin was nearly impossible to trace. But they carried information that made her hands shake as she decoded the data streams. Reports of Veiltharn facilities throughout the sector experiencing operational anomalies. Descriptions of alien personnel exhibiting unprecedented behavioral modifications, and most significantly, references to a neurological contamination event spreading through occupation forces on multiple worlds. Whatever was happening on Tertius Prime, it wasn't isolated. Naya's improvised command center occupied a maintenance tunnel 3 levels below the primary control room, its walls lined with jury-rigged equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. She had cannibalized components from dozens of systems, creating a hybrid network that combined human adaptability with Veiltharn efficiency. The result was ugly, unstable, and capable of things that conventional engineering said were impossible. As she worked to enhance the incoming signal quality, a new transmission began filtering through her receivers. This one was different, closer, clearer, and carrying an encryption signature she recognized from her days aboard the Wandering Star. It was a merchant marine emergency frequency, the kind used for distress calls in contested space. "This is Captain Henrik Larson of the Free Trader Defiant Echo." The voice crackled through layers of static, broadcasting to any Terran Republic forces in the Tertius system. "We are carrying essential medical supplies and technical personnel, requesting immediate coordination with resistance elements for supply drop." Naya's heart raced as she fine-tuned the reception. The Defiant Echo was a name she knew, one of the few merchant vessels that had managed to evade Veiltharn patrols and continue operating in occupied space. If Larson was risking a run to Tertius Prime, it meant the situation here had attracted attention from forces outside the system. But responding to the transmission would require activating her primary transmitter array, action that would immediately alert every Veiltharn monitoring station within 100 light-years. She would have one chance to establish contact before enforcement units tracked the signal to its source. The decision was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps in the tunnel outside her hidden command center. Naya immediately began shutting down her equipment, following protocols she had drilled into memory. If this was a security sweep, she needed to appear to be conducting routine maintenance rather than running an illegal communications operation. But the figure that emerged from the shadows wasn't a Veiltharn guard. It was Marcus Vale, the bioengineer whose mysterious arrival in the mining complex had coincided with increasingly strange reports from throughout the facility. He looked exhausted, his prison uniform stained with the chemical residue of industrial work, but his eyes held the bright focus of someone driven by desperate purpose. "Ms. Cross," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that cut through her surprise. "I know what you're doing here, and I need your help." Naya's hand moved instinctively toward the emergency deletion protocol that would wipe her entire system in case of compromise. "I don't know what you're talking about. 3 months ago, you accessed the medical bay's internal network to download pharmaceutical synthesis protocols," Marcus continued, apparently unconcerned by her denial. 2 weeks later, you tapped into the geological survey system to map underground water sources. Last week, you interfaced with the atmospheric processing controls to analyze trace chemical compositions. The accuracy of his knowledge was terrifying. Naya had been careful to cover her tracks, to make each intrusion appear routine rather than coordinated. If he could piece together her activities, so could Veiltharn's security analysis. "Those were all perfectly legal maintenance procedures," she said carefully. Marcus smiled, an expression that seemed incongruous given their circumstances. "You're building something, a communication system capable of reaching beyond the planetary interference grid. You're planning to call for help. And if I was, then you need to know that help might already be here, in a form no one expected." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The Veiltharn are changing, Ms. Cross. Something is happening to their neural structure, awakening sensory pathways that have been dormant for millennia. They're beginning to experience pain, fear, vulnerability, everything they've used against us." The implication struck Naya like a physical blow. If the occupying forces were becoming psychologically unstable, it would explain the increasing reports of erratic behavior, the apparent breakdown in their normally perfect coordination. "You did this?" she asked. "I created a biochemical catalyst that can reactivate dormant neural pathways in Veiltharn physiology," Marcus confirmed. "But the effect is spreading beyond my original calculations. It's not just affecting individual exposure victims, it's somehow propagating through their population on a genetic level." Naya's technical mind immediately grasped the broader implications. If their entire command structure is compromised, their orbital defenses, their communication networks, exactly. But we have a very narrow window of opportunity. The effect is temporary in its current form. They'll eventually develop countermeasures or adaptation protocols. We need to coordinate with outside forces now, while their ability to respond is degraded. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the facility, suggesting that the operational anomalies were accelerating. Naya made her decision with the swift calculation that had kept her alive. "Through 3 years of occupation, I can establish contact with the ship in orbit," she said, moving to her primary transmitter controls. "But activating the array will expose our location to every monitoring system in the sector. We'll have maybe 10 minutes before they trace the signal." "10 minutes might be enough," Marcus replied. "There's something else you need to transmit. Data about the neurological catalyst, instructions for synthesis, distribution protocols. If this can be replicated on other occupied worlds." Naya's hands flew across her improvised controls, bringing the hidden array to full power for the first time since its construction. Energy surged through circuits that had never been designed to carry such loads, and she could smell ozone and burning insulation as her hybrid systems strained beyond their limits. "This is Tertius Prime Resistance Network," she broadcast on the emergency frequency. "We have critical intelligence regarding Veiltharn Command Structure vulnerability. Uploading data now." Captain Larson's response came immediately. "Tertius. Ground station, we copy your transmission. Stand by for data receipt." As Marcus fed his research data into her system, Naya watched her instruments register incoming Veiltharn security sweeps. Their search